you again for coming. And Robert, would you like to start?
You bet. Is anyone having difficulty seeing the copy of the sandbox that I'm sharing? So I'm not hearing any trouble. The first thing I wanted to point out to everybody was the sandbox at sandbox.ietf.org. That's what I have shared here. It is a copy of the Datatracker that's running on a separate machine with a copy of the production database that gets updated every day around 2 o'clock in the morning on the west coast of the U.S. It's a safe place for you to experiment. You can log into the sandbox as anyone if you know their username. So I'm going to log in as me. The password for all accounts, and it's the only data that's changed as data is dumped from the production database and loaded onto the sandbox system, is that all these passwords get replaced with the common password, all lowercase. So now I've logged in. I've got my my account set up to where I'm a member of the Secretariat. So as we're going through this today, looking at the sandbox, you're going to get to see a lot of buttons that you don't normally see. It's the Secretariat's view as they're looking at different things. And I was hoping that that would give people a nicer idea of what the Secretariat can do to help you and when it's easy for them and when it's not. So it is perfectly safe to do horrible, destructive things to the data on this instance of the Datatracker. You've got this nice bar up the top that has the different color. When you're looking at the first page, you know you're in development mode. You can keep track of knowing that you're on the right system where it's okay to just make a mess right here. There is no path for data to go back from this machine into the production instance. Keep that in mind. If you start using the sandbox on a regular basis, look up once in a while to make sure that you haven't accidentally ended up on the sandbox when you're trying to deal things with the Datatracker, because anything you do in the sandbox will go away the next 2 o'clock in the morning on the Pacific time zone. So one of the first things I wanted to point out, based on lots of questions I've been getting about email, is this edit profile page. If you've not gone here on your account, please do so. You can start on the sandbox, but look at it on the production system. There are two things I wanted to point out. You have the ability to control which of your email addresses get used for your different roles. When the Datatracker is sending me something, because I'm on the IEB, it will use this address. If I wanted it to use a different address than it used for all my other roles, I could set it here. It also tells you what email addresses it knows for you. So in this list of email addresses for me, you'll notice 2 of them are showing with the blue checkbox, and the rest of them have a line through them. If I were to uncheck that box, it runs a line through it. Visually, what this is saying is which of these addresses are active. The Datatracker, when it sends mail to Robert Sparks, the person associated with this login, it will only use these active email addresses. And we'll come back and touch on that again in a minute when we talk about how the draft aliases get constructed and what addresses end up in it. So please do take a look at the set of email addresses that are there for you. If there are any that the tracker should know about you that it doesn't already, feel free to add them. If it knows old ones, if it's found something that can't reach you anymore, please make sure it is deactivated. The other field that I wanted to point out on this particular form is this ASCII short field. And it's got this description here for what it is. This one's a little bit misunderstood. We're trying to find a better name for it to make it obvious. What it's for is if the Datatracker makes a really bad guess building an ASCII name out of the name. If you have non-ASCII characters in your name, or if you've got other name components that are a little bit out of the norm. Whenever it tries to display something like the the list of active working groups, and it needs to have a fairly compact set of names displayed, it will use that ASCII short name if it's populated. Otherwise, it will use the ASCII name. You'll notice some folks in here like Mark Nottingham and Sean Turner have chosen really short names, and it's probably better if you don't do that. So generally that field, the short name field, the ASCII short name field, you should leave blank unless the data tracker is doing something dumb with your name and you want to correct it. Okay, so I've got a whirlwind tour of features that some of you might not have stumbled across. Please share them with other people as we go through them. In keeping with the format as I understand it from this call, if you have a pressing question, feel free to interrupt, but if it's something that you think is going to jump into a bunch of discussion, let's pack all those at the end and we'll get into an interactive exploration of the system at that time. So I want to start out at the main search page. So if we go to document search, a change that was recently made allows you to search for documents with much more free-form text than you might have been able to in the past. We can do review tracker here. In the past, that would find, yeah, it's interesting, it found nothing. In the past, that would find draft names and it would search through titles. Now it does a far more aggressive search. Let's look at RTGWG instead. That'll find us some documents. So it's found us all kinds of documents that have RTGWG in the name. If there were documents that didn't have RTGWG in the name but were associated with the routing group by way of adoption or whatever, they would show up here too. The thing I wanted to point out was how this up here is the URL is constructed up here. This is the long form that captures all the sorting and the option boxes inside the search. It is a long form for exactly this. That would run the same search. The interesting thing is that we could also search for things like use cases where you replace spaces with a plus. Welcome to obscure feature number 1. That will chew for a minute and then it will come back and find us things that have use cases in the document name, the document title, the document abstract. So it's a useful way to find documents that are related to a concept. So you can either type those into the search bar here, or if you know ahead of time, if you're like sending somebody a link in email, you can just construct it by typing in the URL. Building the URL with the name that you're searching for. Okay, the next thing I wanted to look at were some knobs that you could turn on modifying what gets displayed for your working group. So let's look at, I'm going to pick on RTGWG a lot today. If somebody wants me to pick on something else, just let me know. In particular, the charter page. When you're logged in as an AD or one of the chairs or secretary, somebody that has the edit permission for this group, you get this edit group button. And I wanted to focus on that form for a minute. The first thing I wanted to point out there was this additional URLs block. You can put anything you want in this block and it will show up on your charter page. Wikis, the pointers to GitHub pages. I'm going to put Amazon in here because I can. So somebody unmuted and is typing. It looks like it's Chris. You have a question or?
I'm not typing, but yeah, actually, I did have a question or a question about getting a link to the wiki as a tab, a top-level tab on this page, because for some reason, when we went to this view, that was lost.
So you're saying having this more information show up here as appear to one of these things?
Yeah, I mean, we're pointing people towards wikis, presumably, and yet new users have a difficult time finding a wiki.
Okay.
Anyways, just, is there any way to make this, you know, new users are unlikely to go to the charter page. This is useful, but it would be more useful if it could actually be more prominent.
I'm writing it down.
Okay.
Okay. So, but did everybody follow how to at least get this to here? With Chris's suggestion, we could also display this information up here so that it just shows up no matter which of these tabs you happen to be looking at, and you see it in places other than just on this charter tab. But at the moment, you can get links to whatever you want to on your charter page under this working group block more info section through that edit group. Just to come back here again, now that you saw that go by. What goes in parentheses here is the text that gets put on the page. If you don't provide anything there, it just presents the link.
Hey, I've got a question.
Sure.
I'm currently looking at my working group page in the sandbox, and I'm not getting the edit group button.
Are you logged in?
Yes, I'm logged in as myself. And I have edit milestones and customize workflow, but I don't have edit group.
So are you logged in? Are you looking at the routing area working group?
No, I'm looking at the PALS working group, which is my group.
Okay.
I'm also having the same problem, Robert, with IDR and Trell.
Maybe that's a IESG function or secretary function?
Well, I think that it is supposed to be exposed to chairs and secretaries. I will go verify, and if it's not, I will fix it. So until that gets fixed, if you want to have things put in, you can send mail to the Secretariat. The Secretariat clearly has the button.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, I'm looking again to see.
Could you go back to the previous page for 1 second?
This is probably why I will move additional URLs where you can get to it. The reason that I can see now why this is limited to the Secretariat right now is because chairs management's right here.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the request close group either. All I see is the edit milestones and customize.
That's definitely a Secretariat function.
Okay, very good.
Okay. So this is ADs and Secretariats. It's really an AD function. The Secretariat can operate on the behalf of an AD.
Okay.
So this is the button that an AD would punch when they're ready to close a working group down. It takes them to a form. And look, I'm on the sandbox, so I'll go ahead and punch this. Takes them to a form where the AD can list to the Secretariat what's supposed to happen with things like mailing lists and what the wording of the closure announcement should be and things like that. So,
okay, cool.
All right. So this is good. I need to pull that URL editing stuff up to somewhere where chairs can get to it. Let's look at the next place that I wanted to look at, which was this customized workflow section. And we'll just stay on PALS for the moment, if you don't mind. This is a fairly underutilized set of features that were added about 4 years ago through a project, and an RFC was taken through, I think it was the 6174 that defined these states. We knew that not all working groups are the same. Part of the developing the consensus for what became that requirements document pointed out that working groups needed to be able to tailor what states they were going to bother with. So you have the opportunity to come in here and move states that you're never going to use out of the way. And if you need additional states, it's possible to add them, but you can't add them yourself. It is actually a combination of code and data change. So it's something to send to the tools team. Now, back in December, we had a conversation on the Working Group Chairs mailing list about getting either some new states or new tags. I believe that the conversation ended up on tags, and I think that that has actually made it to the front of the queue, so it will be in the next release, that we add some tags that indicate that the document was on hold waiting for implementation was one of the tags that was called out. But look through these things. If there's anything that your group doesn't want to use, you've got an easy way to get it out of your way. If there is a state or a tag that would be useful to you, just send in a request for them and we will get them there. The ISG did verify that this isn't something that they want to put themselves in the way of. You just send the request to the tools team and the tools team will do the right thing.
Robert, IDR was the one asking for the implementation tag. So when you get that, or when you add new tags, could you send a note to the working groups list so I can go use it?
Yep, I'll do that specifically, but it will also show up in the release notes when the data tracker is released. And if you aren't in the habit of skimming the release notes that get sent to the Working Group Chairs list on new releases, please do so, because if there is anything particularly large that's changed, there'll be a heads up there, a place to at least start asking questions from. Okay. Here's the next thing I want to take a look at. Let's go back to the documents for PALS, and let's pick on a document that is still being crunched. Here's one in AD evaluation, this 4447 BIS 03. Let's go look at that document's email expansions. Hopefully everybody's discovered this tab. This tells you where and when the data tracker is going to send email. It shows you what the various draft aliases expand into. It tells you, for example, if there is somebody adds a comment into the history for the document history thing, this is where mail is going to go reflecting that comment. And if for some reason these things aren't right, your first tool for correcting is to use the document's notify field. That tends to get copied into everything. The second is to send in a request to the Secretariat saying, hey, I think blah should be on this list. Can we make that happen? So where do these addresses come from? I get a lot of questions frequently because these addresses are quite frequently not the addresses that appear in the draft, especially for very, very old documents like RFCs that have a 1 in their first digit or a 2 in their first digit. You know, the authors will be listed out here with current addresses, hopefully. So if you remember when we were looking at the accounts profile page for me, if I have a document out there that has rsparks at dynamicsoft.com listed as an author, it remembers that that was the address used for that document. But it links from that address to the person. And when it comes time to construct things like the document aliases, it goes and finds the best active address. So it's going to be the one that was set to active most recently. Internally to the data tracker, if somebody has expressed a strong preference for an address, there's a preference bit that needs to be exposed on the UI here, but it's not yet. Something that's had the preferred address bit set will always get used regardless of what's been set active any earlier. So this is where these addresses are coming from, are the sets of addresses that are associated with people. The data tracker learns these addresses primarily through draft submission, parses this address out of the drafts. It also gathers addresses from the nom-com process when you nominate somebody with an address or you send in comments on somebody with an address, and if it's an address that the tracker hasn't seen before, it will associate that address with the person. And yes, that should make you feel a little bit twitchy about how you might end up with an address to the wrong person, but this has worked out well for us and we haven't run into trouble. And it, of course, allows people to enter addresses manually here. If you see an alias that's got a totally bogus address in it, contact the person that's involved, ask them to edit their profile, or if there's somebody that's no longer active in the IETF or they don't, you know that they're not the kind of person that is going to want to go through the hassle to log in to the data tracker, you can send a note to the Secretariat saying, I think this address is inactive. Can you do what you need to make sure the data tracker stops using it? They'll go make sure with the person, if the person's still around, that it's okay and clean up their profile for them. So I thought I heard a question out there.
Yeah, it's Michael Richardson. So it sounds like that this is kind of interesting. So it allows somebody to, for instance, put their long-term address on, they don't check very often on a draft, but get relevant things directly to them on their preferred address, or maybe their employer filters out all the IETF email because of DMARC, but they could still put their employer's address on the draft. Is that being used actively like that, or just it happens to work that way?
It happens to work that way. People do take advantage of it. So. Okay, let me back up. I'm sorry?
I guess that wasn't exactly a question. It was more like, oh, gee, that's something you could do, couldn't you? Maybe sure. I'm asking, is this something that should be encouraged? Maybe that's what I'm asking as much as anything else.
It's not going to hurt anything.
Okay.
So if it makes the setup easier for you to manage the mail that you're getting, feel free to make all the manipulation you want in that space. So the data tracker is going to use addresses that are marked active. It'll use preferred address if the preferred bit is set over anything else. And unless there are bugs, it won't send mail to addresses that are not active. Now, we had a bug that was addressed again in the release that went out Sunday. There is a condition, particularly in very, very old drafts, this is some legacy stuff that we've had to carry along, where we couldn't find an email address for somebody that was in the draft. We couldn't associate the author in the draft with an existing person. A person got created, and a bogus email address gets created for them that looks like unknown-email- the person's name, with no @ sign or anything like that. Those should never have been marked active. There was a path through the code where quite a few of them did. That got fixed on the release that went out last Sunday. But if you had stumbled across this, looking in these aliases, and you saw something that looked like unknown email, John Doe, that's where those came from. If you ever see one again, send a note to the tools team. Something's gone wrong and we need to go find it and make it go away again.
Robert?
Yep.
I just noticed when going to my profile page that I'm missing some of my historical email addresses that are in old RFCs. So I just tried to add one in the real data tracker, and it said it was sending an email to my old address, and of course there's not going to be anyone there anymore. So is there an easy way to add historical, no longer active email addresses?
You added it. The fact that the email is going to fail doesn't mean that it's not going to add.
But it's not showing up because it's waiting for confirmation from my no longer active email address.
It should have been sending mail to all addresses, but I'll check that. Okay, add dead email as inactive. All right, I'll chase that one down.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, so I wanted to come back to the draft and point out a button that has changed a few times recently, and that's this Search Lists button. Right now, this thing is integrated in with the new Mail Archive tool and does a search based on the draft name, whatever the draft name is. We'll see this, or it will go do a Google search. We haven't found a good way to get this thing to do a search over Monarch. But this will do a search over all of the IETF lists and tell you places where it found references to that draft name. It is a particularly useful button when you're sitting looking at a publication request or preparing a Shepherd's report. I know the ADs use this button quite frequently as a first order triage when they start looking at a draft that they hadn't been following closely in a working group, like if somebody hands them something and asks them to do an AD-sponsored individual submission draft. This is a way that they get insight into what activity has occurred around that draft on the various lists. Please help spread the existence of that link on the document page around to people. Again, that sits right here. Somewhat related is this track button. This is another fairly underutilized feature. It has actually some rough edges on it, so I think a lot of people have tried to use it in the past, ran into the rough edges and stopped. Some of those rough edges have gone away recently. There's a project underway right now that's taking more of them away, so I encourage you to spend more time exploring. There is this My Track Docs and then the STIR Working Group Docs tag. Under My Track Docs, you as an individual have a list of documents that you're interested in. Currently, I have no rules set up. I could explicitly add particular documents by using the document search function. I could go grab some SIPCOR drafts, for example, and say I want to see, I'm just stabbing randomly at some drafts. I want to see those on my track documents thing. So those are here. Now any changes that happen to them, if their states change or whatever, I'll get email about them, or I can do things like set up an RSS feed or an Atom feed to see the changes for, even the very small, fine detail level changes, or only big things like, we're changing the publication status or the document got approved or something along those lines.
Richard, would that, Robert, would that track errata too on RFCs?
Not right now because the errata system is on the RFC editor. Website. So we are working with the RFC editor to take advantage of data on both systems better than we currently do, and making sure that we have errata notification to authors happening through the similar mechanisms to what we have for any other changes in the data tracker is one of the high bullets on that list.
So what kind of things would tell me about an RFC? I guess a status change, which would be an IEST action.
Obsoleted.
Obsoleted. Yeah. Okay, so it wouldn't tell me if someone started a BIS effort, but it would tell me when they finished.
Yes.
Is there any way, if you start out with a individual draft, that can be moved into the automatically moved into the working group draft, or do you need to resubmit the explicitly added documents when it changes to a working group draft?
So what you're asking is, will this thing, this is called the community tool, you see community in the URL up here, Will it take explicitly added drafts and follow replaces? If the draft is replaces, will it continue to follow the drafts that replace this draft, right?
That is correct. Yes.
I don't know. It's a good feature if it doesn't. I'll go find out, and if it doesn't do that already, I'll put it on the set of things that we can add. So I wanted to call out this Rules tab. There are several ways that you can match classes of documents that are provided. Some rules are provided here. If you want to watch all IDs from some particular troublemaker that you have, or some collaborator, if you want to watch for things that are happening on the independent submission stream, you can watch for documents that hit a particular state in that stream. So you see this list of rules. These rules get reevaluated whenever documents change state. So things will get added to lists at the time that the documents change whatever the relative feature that's being looked at here. And if you've got an RSS feed set up, for example, on your personal list, then if you had this rule that was looking for ISE publishing something, you would get notifications whenever, immediately when the ISE published that thing. Now, it's pretty easy to see the utility of this for what you are interested in as an individual. The tool is intended to also make it so that you could curate one of these lists for your working group, and you could point your working group at it. That part is still badly done at the moment, is really hard to use. The interface for it is here, but exposing what the documents that this thing finds is not well done. You have the same export, so you can go build something for your working group. You can tell your working group about links to where they can find these documents. You can either link directly to this page. You can send them links to any of these feeds or to the mailing list for changes in the status of anything that's on this list. But what we don't have right now is this integrated nicely with the working group page. We don't have, I was looking at the list for STIR here. It would be a very natural thing to have anything that matched there show up as, chair curated list, down here or something. That doesn't happen yet, nor does it happen automatically anywhere on this page. You could use that additional info to put a URL link to what you created here. There is a project that's in progress that I expect to finish in early March, mid-March, that should be adding a lot of those things. All right, now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on something completely different. Targeting those of you that are interested in writing your own tools. You might remember on Working Group Chairs, just the November, December timeframe, there were a set of tools that people were building for themselves. Fred Baker sent out a Perl script. There was another fellow that sent out a Python script and put it up so that you could download it with pip to very quickly get a summary of what your working group status was so that you could build agendas, things of that nature. You can find pointers to those tools on the Working Group Chairs list. That stuff's not integrated with the tracker. What I wanted to point to, though, was how they're getting to the Datatracker's data. There is a RESTful Web API that's exposed. You need to know a little bit about Django and how you make Django queries to understand what the syntax for the queries look like. And I'm not going to run a tutorial on that right now. I'm just going to show you some examples. If it's the kind of thing that you have an interest in and you want to learn more about it, just reach out to me directly, and we will. I'll give you pointers into how you can how you can construct really good queries. So I just want to do a couple of quick examples. We're going to go into the document part of the database here, and I'm going to ask for all the documents that are associated with RTGWG that are minutes. And we'll get back this XML document that is going to give us links to all the different sets of minutes that RTGWG has in the Datatracker. If you are writing code, you might find getting that result in JSON more friendly than getting it in XML. This is built on top of the Tasty API, TastyPie API. You can look that up, and and as I said, if you're interested, I can give you pointers to figure out how to make these queries. So I'm going to give you one more example.
Robert,
right quick.
Robert, very quick question. Where's the schema?
It exposes it self-defined in this thing, so it tells you about if you want to look at document and find out what the schema for document is.
No, I mean the database schema, because you have to know that.
Yeah, you have to know what the names are, but this lets you browse it. This is my point. By looking from the top level here, if you start up here at the top level of the API, it tells you about the applications. You can drill down to doc. It'll start telling you about the classes that are
okay.
there, right? And then you can get to the schema for, like, if you want to see what a ballot position doc event looks like. So one of the other changes that's coming soon is a way to browse this in a much more friendly fashion. So very simple HTTP, it looks like that barfed, didn't it? But a simple HTTP rendering of this instead of an XML or a JSON rendering to make it more friendly to just explore what the schema is. Now, you can also get just a dump of the database, the same dump that's used on the sandbox. It is the entire database with just everybody's passwords changed to password. And the instructions for that are on the code sprint pages. If you're interested in setting that up or setting up a copy of the tracker that's running on your own laptops because you want to play around with changing it, just send me a note. I can send you links to instructions on how to set that environment up, how to get that dump of that database.
Okay, cool. So what are you running under Django? MySQL?
Yeah, that's what we're running in production.
Cool, super.
Postgres at some point. You can run it on top of SQLite, but some of the integrity stuff gets a little bit weird. We run the tests using SQLite just because it's so much faster, and integrity at that point is not the kinds of integrity weirdness you can't get into don't turn out to be an issue.
Yep, all very cool. Yeah, I was using that stuff extensively for years and rehacking Django, and it's probably the best backend for this kind of stuff. Thanks, great.
Yeah. Pardon me while I fumble type very briefly because I wanted to show off one more of these things. So I'm going to go here and look in the group table for groups whose parent group is the routing area. And I'm getting that by way of just picking the only group out there that has an acronym of RTG and whose current state is active. So this is the active groups in the routing area. So we get all kinds of information. So for, the IDR, we've got the list archive, links to the area, links to the current state. So you could see how you could build something like the IETF application that exists on iPhones, which doesn't use this API yet, but should in one of the upcoming releases. Okay, so just a few more short things, and we'll jump into Q&A. Let me jump into documents, find something that is, I guess this is far enough along, there will be interesting things. I wanted to call attention to this row of buttons where it says formats. Things have been quietly appearing here over time. One of which is if we have the XML source to the document available, you can get it from the front page, just right here. The PDF rendering that Tools does is here. The HTML rendering that Tools does is here. And Tony Hansen and a few other collaborators have recently added a way to get the BibTeX reference information for the document. If you have other useful bits of metadata about the document that are of this nature that you want to add, these are really easy to expand on. So if there, please be brainstorming if there are useful things that we can provide here. Let us know, or even better, come to a sprint and add them. On this main document page, there are a couple of buttons that have been around for a couple of years. The quality of the data there has been improving as we've been fixing up particularly information about very, very old drafts. And that's this references link and this reference by link. If you are getting ready to work on, for instance, Abyss, let's grab RFC. I'm going to just grab one out of space. Let's see, what is 7700? Okay, so the pre-season nickname draft. If you decided you were going to do Abyss for this draft, you might be interested in spanking on that reference by button and find out, what depends on this thing. What has normative references into it and are likely to be affected by what you do with your BIS.
Really interesting yellow as draft name. That's really useful to see.
Yep. And of course, it lets you explore these things recursively. So if you want to see, what refers to 70 to 75, 64, it's just one button away. And you can, it's kind of like TV tropes. You can get lost in this stuff for a little while. Somewhat related, if we go back to the group page, for the documents that are currently active in your working group, we can construct on the fly the reference relationships between the documents that you have and documents in other working groups, possibly expired things. So this graph is kind of big. I don't want to drag everybody through it other than just to show you that it's out here. Here's a key that describes what's going on. You've got a working group document. It might have a normative downref. It might be referring to something that's been replaced, right? So it needs to be updated to follow whatever, replaced the thing that was replaced. It might be relying on something that is expired, right? So this is a useful tool when you're just looking at the overall state, at the overall state of your working group and, looking for particularly things that might be falling between the cracks. They'll start to show up here a little more quickly than they will in other places.
Beautiful. Nothing better than some pretty picture of transitive closures to keep geeks happy, no?
Okay. One other thing quickly. Is everyone familiar with this page? as it crunches for a minute to build this out. This page shows, and it's linked from the left nav bar under meetings, there is this session requests button. It goes to this page. It has all of the meeting requests for the upcoming IETF meeting, showing who has requested a slot, who's indicated that they're not going to meet, but in particular, what these groups are listing as their first, second, and third order conflicts and the people that they think must be present in order for the group to have a successful meeting. This is a good place for you when you are maintaining your own conflict lists, sending in a session request, for you to mine to see who's referencing your groups and who's referencing the groups that you have on your first order conflict, to see if you're missing somebody that you should be listing as a conflict, or perhaps to tickle that you don't necessarily need to list that group as a conflict. And I'm sure your ADs have beat you up on this already, but keeping those conflicts lists real is important. Throwing things in there just because, well, maybe it would be good if we didn't have a conflict, it makes the actual overall scheduling effort extremely difficult. We severely over-constrain the search space for finding schedules that are conflict-free, and having data that is meaningful will make us have way better meeting schedules than data that is full of sort of conflicts. So I had a few things I was going to talk about that were upcoming changes, but Sunday's release made one of them available now. So I'm going to point out a brand new feature. Let's go back to RTGWG.
Robert?
Yeah.
When does the top banner, groups, documents, meetings, etc. show up on the general web page? Or is it there and I can't find it?
What are you looking for?
The stuff at the top. IT and Sandbox you have at the top. Groups, documents, meetings, other, Robert Sparks. How do you get that banner to show up on the regular website?
It's in blue. You might not be seeing it because it's in blue on the production machine.
Okay.
So is this what you're looking for?
Yep, that's where I am. Okay.
Okay. Let me show you something else that you might be running into. Actually, I can't. I'm in Chrome, and I only know how to do this in Firefox. This is responsive. I'm going to try something that, no, I'm not, because I have no idea what WebEx is going to do if I resize this window. So I'm going to leave it alone. In the view that you're playing with, when you're playing with the sandbox, resize it. Watch what happens to this top menu bar and to this sidebar, particularly as the window gets small. Okay, so I wanted to come back to the groups page, right? And something that those of you that have been cleverly following along, you'll note that there is a path to get to this that just says group instead of saying WG, RG, AG, or whatever. If you're just typing things out and you don't want to remember what the group is, group will get you there. This Sunday's release added a new tab on this row. Right here.
Meetings. Oh. Ooh. That's nice, because that was all buried in the tools page before, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep. So for IETF 94, for RTWG, you can go grab the meeting materials for each of the sessions. For 95, right now we don't have any materials loaded. It's the meeting is waiting for scheduling. So if you were to try to modify the materials, you're going to land right now in the place that you're familiar with, you're used to landing in. It's just an integration with the existing system. Our next step, and I'm hoping we get it done before we get to Buenos Aires, is that you will have a much more editing in place instead of landing on this form to do uploads of slides and minutes and things. You'll be able to manipulate those things directly from here or directly from when you're looking at, let me use 94 as an example. If you were looking at this page, you would be able to put new things up directly from here. Like if you needed to revise the version of the minutes, you would be able to do so right from this spot. Now, there's something that is very new that we added with this particular release. I want to go to this IETF 95 materials for RTGWG. And I'm going to jump over here for just a minute and go to the Documents tab. That being able to edit the things like the minutes directly on that page will make what I'm about to do make a lot more sense, but I want to show that you can do this already. Let's say that you plan to discuss, for whatever reason, you plan to discuss this FRR algorithm draft at this next meeting. You can now go put this thing on an agenda. Right now it's not on any agendas. Let's go put this document on, and I'm the secretariat. I'm running as a secretariat, so I see anything. When you're logged in, you would get presented with your groups here. So we were going to put this thing on the RTGWG. Let's put it on the first session, and we'll grab the current version. There's an improvement there. That should be the default. And we can now see that this draft is on the agenda of RTGWG at IETF 95. And you can, if we reload this page, we'll see that we've got this draft as one of the meeting materials for that session. So new things, start experimenting with it, play around with it in the sandbox in particular, see what you can do with it to make it useful. The other changes that we got, I'm just playing with it. So on the draft thing where it says on edit on meeting, so is that a historical list? So it would tell me which drafts which meetings a document has already been discussed at? Yes.
Wow.
If you add something to a meeting and it gets updated, what happens? So you add an 8, and before the meeting somebody submits 9.
It will not automatically update to 9 because you may be explicitly talking about 8, at least the way it's got right now. One of the things we may want to do is to have a wildcard for current so that whatever's the current version would be the thing that would show up.
Yeah, I think that would be useful.
It appears I can't add non-working group drafts to the agenda.
That is true, you can't.
Because I don't own them, I guess.
Right, you could get the secretariat to do so. And it may be that we've got the permission model set in the wrong place. You should, as a chair, be able to put any document on your group's agenda.
Yeah, so that's really valuable for dealing with document ID shopping or working group shopping for IDs.
And in MPLS, we have a lot that hit multiple work groups.
Yep. And that main document page view will show you, where we were. Where was it with that?
So also, Robert, I think that this means that if I see a document and want to find the presentation material that might have talked about it, that a person could go through and find out which groups it was presented at directly with this, and then I guess you'll be able to see the link directly to the meeting materials, right?
Yep.
That's such a useful historical thing. Wow. Okay. And I wanted to say kudos on this calendar that's now appeared with the doc at the top of the document. Yeah. It's very interesting.
That's primarily Lars Eggert's work. So a lot of this grew out of the work we were doing for the Edu team, where the Edu team can take documents like the newcomers training and see, what it's on the agenda of, when it was last presented, where the versions were presented, what meetings they were presented at. So. This is another area to explore if you hadn't already, are the materials for teams, a slightly different concept. Instead of, these are typically slides, but instead of slides that are designed to be one shot for one meeting, they're things that are versioned like documents, and you expect them to be used at multiple meetings. And we're slowly improving the UI and just the conceptual metaphors for handling these things. Calling them materials turns out to be really confusing with meeting materials. We'll do a little bit better there, but it's worth exploring. Okay, so we're kind of running long. Let me just talk about 3 things that you should be seeing in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then let's jump into any Q&A. We have projects that have recently been awarded. Work is just starting on them to improve the way that you can request and manage interim meetings so that you can see the schedule for interim meetings. This meetings tab made that slightly better, but we need to make that even easier for people to find when are all of the interim meetings for Group X, when are all of the interim meetings for Area A available, and that project will crank that out, and it will make the meeting materials management for interim meetings look much more like the regular meetings materials management. We also have a small project out to deal with better tracking of manual posts. So when you end up in a situation where the submit tool is bouncing a draft that shouldn't be bounced, and you have to ask the secretariat to put this draft into the Datatracker on your behalf. Right now, there's a lot of information that gets lost. We're integrating that workflow into the Datatracker better so that we end up with a good record of what actually happened. We are starting work on building a Django variant of Taro's review tracking tool for directorates and other teams that do reviews. You might remember the draft we took through IETF last call, middle of the year last year, on building out requirements for assigning and tracking reviews. We expect that to come into existence sometime in the next couple of months. And finally, one of the very next releases should integrate Yang checking with ID submit. So if there are any Yang modules that are in the draft, ID submit should be automatically verifying those. In the process of adding that Yang checker, Henrik has built a nice way to plug in other checkers. So if you have formal languages or other kinds of checks that you think should be made on documents at ID submit time, raise a flag, let us know. We've now got a fairly easy place to plug things in. Okay, those were the things that I wanted to show off today. It looks like I've now been given host, not just presenter. I hope that doesn't mean Aaliyah fell off the call. Yeah, it looks like it did. So I'm going to end the recording and start the Q&A portion.